Welcome, everyone, to this demonstration of ArchivesSpace and overview of ArchivesSpace member benefits. I'm Jessica Crouch, the Community Engagement Lead for ArchivesSpace. I'm joined today by ArchivesSpace Lead Program Manager, Christine DeBella, and ArchivesSpace Program Assistant, Bailey Grace Harrell. This session is intended for people considering using ArchivesSpace. If you're already an ArchivesSpace user and hopefully member, this presentation will probably not offer any new information, but you're more than welcome to attend. I'll begin by giving a brief overview of the ArchivesSpace program before moving to a light demonstration of the application itself. After, I'll provide information about ArchivesSpace membership and member benefits. We're using the latest version of ArchivesSpace for this demo. That's version 4.0. We won't be able to troubleshoot issues with your own implementations of ArchivesSpace, and we'll be focusing this demonstration on using the ArchivesSpace staff user interface and public user interface. If you have a question or issue with your own implementation, please feel free to email us at archivespacehome@lyrasis.org. This session is being recorded, and all presentation slides and links will be made available with the recording. So, what is ArchivesSpace? ArchivesSpace is an open source content management system used by archivists in a variety of settings to manage and describe their collections and optionally make those collections publicly available through our public user interface. ArchivesSpace supports a range of functions performed in archives and special collections, including accessioning, arrangement, description, preservation, and access, and allows archivists to describe a variety of materials, including both physical items and digital objects, including born digital material. ArchivesSpace is the successor to two widely used open source applications, Archivist Toolkit and Archon. We know many archives continue to use these two systems, and we do have migration tools available on our website for those users looking to migrate to ArchivesSpace from these legacy systems. In short, ArchivesSpace is developed by archivists, supported by diverse archival repositories, and fills a common need for archives around the world. While the ArchivesSpace application is free to download and use, ArchivesSpace has a membership model to support the development of the application and user community. Only organizations that are members of ArchivesSpace directly contribute to the sustainability of the application, and because of that support, members of ArchivesSpace are entitled to certain tangible benefits. I'm going to get into those after the demo. In addition to these benefits, members also serve on the various governance groups within ArchivesSpace, including our User Advisory Council, Technical Advisory Council, and Board. Members are also asked to participate in community discussions and polls about the future development of the application. In this way, ArchivesSpace members work together to create and improve an archives management application reflecting our shared values as archivists. That means ArchivesSpace is standards-driven, flexible and extensible, customizable and localizable, integrates with other applications people use to do their work, and it promotes efficiency overall. And ArchivesSpace is and provides an opportunity for archivists to manage and make available as much archival material as possible, no matter their institutional setting. We have ArchivesSpace members working in large government archives and major academic institutions, as well as community archives and lone arrangers working in very small organizations. ArchivesSpace promotes adoptions of standards and develops shared best practices across all of these organizations. It brings people from different sizes and types of institutions together to solve common problems we all share. ArchivesSpace also provides the opportunity to take all of your work, all of this archival description, and make it available to users via a public user interface. We're going to see that a little bit later. So with that, I'm going to move over into the demo. So let me close my slides. All right. So you should now be seeing an ArchivesSpace home screen. So this is the ArchivesSpace staff user interface. In this demonstration, I will be spending most of our time. Oh, sorry.
We're actually not seeing your screen. We're still seeing your slides.
Oh, no. All right, let me see. How about now?
Yep, we're seeing it now.
Okay, perfect. All right, let me know when I transition back to the slides if that happens again. Okay, so now you should be seeing the ArchivesSpace staff user interface. In this demonstration, I'll spend most of our time exploring the ArchivesSpace staff user interface, where archivists and those working to describe materials will also be spending most of their time. After, I'll move to the ArchivesSpace public user interface to briefly show what the ArchivesSpace what ArchivesSpace looks like for researchers and patrons. Before I dive into the demo, I want to mention that all of the examples we're using today are real collections held by ArchivesSpace member organizations. These organizations made their metadata available to the program for the purposes of education and training, and in the interest of creating a more diverse set of example data for users. We're very grateful to these organizations for their willingness to share their data. I'll also mention that I'm going to be moving very quickly. I want to make sure there's plenty of time for Q&A. So I apologize in advance for talking quickly, and please do drop any questions into the Q&A. We'll hold those until the end, but I'm happy to go back and look at anything later if you would like clarification. So this is the staff user interface for ArchivesSpace. This is what it looks like when a staff user logs into the application. It doesn't look like much when you first look at it, but from here you actually can invoke almost all of the functions that you need to use ArchivesSpace. This initial staff interface we say is divided into 4 zones. So I'm going to break down the demo into those 4 zones. The first is this option, what you're seeing right up here, starting with select repository. These options are very high level. These are places where you can invoke functions that impact the application overall or your specific repository overall. First, starting with selecting what repository you want to work in. So this might not be relevant for everyone. If you don't have multiple repositories in your ArchivesSpace implementation, this is not a thing you need to worry about. But if you're an organization that maybe has multiple divisions or you have multiple libraries on your campus, then you may have multiple repositories within your ArchivesSpace implementation. If a user has the permission that allows them to navigate between repositories, they would be able to move between those repositories here. So there are two sets or 2 repositories in this particular example instance of ArchivesSpace, but there could be more than that. And there also could be none. So again, that would be dependent on permissions. If a staff user only needs to work within one repository, they would only have access to that one repository. Next to this option, you have the system dropdown. Again, from here, really high level actions that you can take that impact your system overall. I will mention that if you are a user or you have users who do not have the permissions to invoke any of these functions, when they select the system dropdown, all they will see is the option to go to the ArchivesSpace Help Center. So the Help Center contains our user manuals, user tutorial videos, and recordings of past trainings, and it is available to ArchivesSpace members. So if you are an ArchivesSpace member, you would be able to select that and move over and look at our Help Center. But if you have the necessary permissions, which this example account does, you would be able to see all of these. So this is where you can do things like manage your controlled value list. So those are your drop downs. If there are editable drop downs in the application, you can do that. It's also where you can do things like manage container and location profiles. We're not going to have time to talk about that, but there is documentation in the Help Center about that. It's also where you can manage your repositories, manage your OAI PMH settings, manage individual users, and look at system information. Again, these are really high-level functions, not things you'll do every day, and not things that everyone in your system is going to need to do, but this is where you can invoke those high-level actions. Next to that, you can see the screen name that you're logged in as. This is an admin account. This is an example account. So that's my screen name. And then when you drop down, again, more very high level, not something you're going to be accessing every day sort of actions that you can take, including setting preferences. So there are 3 different levels of preferences within ArchivesSpace. Global preferences impact everyone using ArchivesSpace regardless of their repository. Again, depending on permissions, not everyone is going to have the ability to do this. Very few people will have the ability to do this probably. But that's where you can set preferences for your entire ArchivesSpace implementation. So if you want the implementation to display in a certain language, or you want specific columns available in your browse screen, and you want everyone to see that, you could do that there. Repository preferences is similar to global preferences, but it would only impact a specific repository. So if you're using multiple repositories in your instance of ArchivesSpace, it would only impact that one repository. And then the default repository preferences are user-specific preferences. So if one user prefers to interact with the application in a certain way or prefers for their browse columns to look a certain way, they can manage their preferences there. So again, depending on permission, not everyone would have access to all of this, but you can really get very granular in your preferences for how you want to interact with ArchivesSpace. It also allows you to manage your user account, and if you have the permissions, to become another user. So if you're managing your ArchivesSpace implementation and you have a staff user who's saying, I'm just not seeing what you're seeing, you can become that user to confirm, oh well, actually, it's because your preferences are set differently or something like that. So below this section, we have another area for very high level user permissions and doing things like running background jobs. Again, just like I can see my screen name here, I know what repository I'm in because this is telling me. And then next to that is a gear menu, which allows me to do a lot more things in the application. Again, not going to have time to get into any of this, but managing user groups and access and user access. This has to do with permissions. This has to do with creating user groups which have certain sets of permissions and then creating counts and moving individual people into those permissions. We have documentation about that in the Help Center, but you can get pretty granular about who has access to do what. You also can do things like manage assessment attributes and manage top containers being like your box, the material where the material lives. Again, not going to have time to get into that, but you can just know that you can create assessment records and assess your material, and you can manage those attributes there as well as manage your top containers as well. Not going to have time to get into it. Another option is you can transfer a repository, which is something you'll probably do never, if ever. But you know, if one repository is merging into another, you can do that here. It also is one of the two places that you can run background jobs. So a background job might be something like importing your information in bulk, and we do have bulk import templates, and you can download those here. They're very handy. They allow you to do things like bulk import anything from subject records all the way to like your archival object records. Very useful, and this is the sort of functionality that's very popular within ArchivesSpace. Other background jobs might be something like generating a PDF or creating container labels, things like that. So you can create background jobs from this gear menu dropdown. You also can run reports. ArchivesSpace has some canned reports that you can use, as well as creating your custom reports and saving those templates. And you can both create those custom report templates here and run reports from the gear menu. And then finally, you can invoke any plugins that you have in your ArchivesSpace implementation. ArchivesSpace has one plugin that comes out of the box with the application. That's the Library of Congress Name Authority File Import plugin. Otherwise, any other plugins would be community-generated plugins that you could optionally use with your ArchivesSpace implementation. All right. So from the right side over to the left side, this is really where you'll be spending most of your time, I think. This is where you can create and browse records. To create records, you just hit create and it drops down. You can see all of the different record types that you can create within ArchivesSpace. The first three record types you see are accession, resource, and digital object records. Resource records would be like your finding aids or your catalogs. So we just call them resource records in ArchivesSpace. You'll notice that under digital objects, there's this little line. That's because accession, resource, and digital object records are known collectively as material description records. And I'll mention, and you will see later, that resource and digital object records both allow for multi-level description, which is expressed through component records. So as we all know, archival description is hierarchical, and you can do that within resource and digital object records. And you'll see that in a minute, like I said. Below that line, you see we have subject records, agent records, container profiles, locations, on and on. These are records that you can create. You can create them independently of an accession, resource, or digital object record, but the intent is they amplify those material description records. You link a subject record to a resource record so that you can link relevant collections together. You assign a resource archival object record to a location. So the idea is these amplify your material description records. Like I said, you can create them separately, or you can create them within the context of the records that you're creating, but they're intended to be additive for your accession, resource, and digital object records. And then also you can see there's another place where you can run background jobs. So like I said, there's two places from here you can create a background job. And then once you have created and saved a record, you can browse all record types as well. I'll show you some browse stuff in just a second, but before I do that, I'll mention the last thing that you can do from the ArchivesSpace staff user interface when you first log in is you can search records. So you can do a basic keyword search. We're all familiar with that, as well as building out some more advanced searches. ArchivesSpace allows you to link 3 different search terms together to create an advanced search. You do need to link them all together with Boolean operators and/or not, and is the default option, but you can build a more robust search there if you'd like. All right, and I said I would briefly show you what a browse screen looks like. So each screen is going to be different depending on the record type you're looking at, but from a browse screen, you can see all of the created records, all of the created resource records within your repository in ArchivesSpace. So this is specific to the repository that you are in. The same is also true for search. When you're searching for records on the staff side, it's going to search for records within the repository you have selected. You're not going to see results for all of the repositories. That's not true of the public user interface, which is searching all available published records. From the browse screen, you can do lots of things like filter your results through text, as well as limit your results according to certain like limiters like subjects for resource records and language of material. If you're looking at a different record type, you'll be given different ways to limit your search. So look at subjects. So you can limit by source or term type. You'll also notice that these columns, I mentioned earlier, that those are things that you can change in your preference management. So if you would prefer for a different column to be available in your browse, you can do that. And then finally, from within a browse screen, if you're like, oh my goodness, I can't find this, it doesn't exist, you can go directly from your browse screen and create that specific record type. So that's another way that you can create a record without having to go to the create dropdown. All right. So very quickly, I'm just going to show you, if you want to create a record, just create dropdown. We're going to create an accession record. So this is what a blank record looks like in ArchivesSpace. Depending on the record type, they're all a little bit different, but the navigation will begin to feel familiar to you as you use the application over time. I'm not going to spend a lot of time looking at this blank record. I'm going to show you some completed records and talk about accession resource and digital object records briefly. But I did want to point out, while we're looking at this nice clean screen, there are a few sort of helpful resources here as well. So as you're scrolling through, anywhere you see these question marks, these are content sensitive help links. These question marks let you know that there is a relevant page or pages in our user manual about this specific content. So if you're using the application and you're getting a little confused about what exactly you're supposed to put in this area, you can select the content sensitive help link and it will take you out to the relevant page for creating dates in an accession record in our user manual. And again, the Help Center is a benefit of membership to ArchivesSpace. If you're an ArchivesSpace member, you would click that and you would go right out to the user manual. You may have to log in, but it will take you to the user manual. Also, you'll notice, or you won't notice, I'm going to show you, if you're using ArchivesSpace and you're getting a little confused about what the different labels mean and what you're supposed to put in individual fields, you can hover over these field labels and you'll notice that you're given a rollover or a tooltip. These are associated with almost all of the labels in ArchivesSpace records. You just hover your mouse over and it will pop up. It's going to typically give you a definition of what that label is to help you get more context. And it will also reference the appropriate rules in DAX or the element that it's used for, like export data formats, so like maybe MARC or EAD, and maybe an example of good practice. The rollover text can be completely modified for your application, so you can integrate your processes and procedures directly into the application. Or maybe if you want to reference a different standard like ISATG, you can do that as well. You'll also notice, and accession records have the least asterisks, but anywhere you see a red asterisk, that means that that is a required field. You cannot save the record in ArchivesSpace without providing the required field. So you need to provide an identifier to save this accession record. I will point out, though, if you decide that you would like to include something like date information, so you select add date, it will open up a subrecord so that you can add date information for this. You now do have more red asterisks. So some of these requirements will build as you build out your record. If you change your mind and you don't want to provide this date information, you can always just remove it and then that requirement is no longer there. But anywhere you see a red asterisk, that means that that information is required to save the record in ArchivesSpace. All right, so I've got a few records already keyed up here for us to look at. So I'm going to move over to an accession record that is open in edit mode. So this is a completed accession record. Accession records store information about the receipt of materials, which are typically unprocessed. An accession record can be for a single item, or it can be for an aggregation of materials. It can be for a collection. It can represent an acquisition of a new collection, or it can be an accrual of an existing resource. All you need to save an accession record in ArchivesSpace is the identifier and the date of the accession. You obviously, or probably, will want to include much more information about your accession record than that. So you can see in this example, there's more information than just the required information so that you can have a more complete accession record. Accession records might want to have something like, your condition descriptions, inventories or box lists, that kind of thing. And then later on, an accession record can be linked to other types of records in ArchivesSpace. So not just things like linking it to relevant subjects or names, but other accession records or a resource record or a digital object record. So once you process the collection, you may want to link that accession record to the processed and just collection that is a resource record. I'm not going to have time to get into it again, but just know there's also functionality within an accession record called spawning functionality. Since you are taking the time to provide all of this description within your accession record, as a time-saving measure, you can use spawn functionality whenever you want to now process the collection and you need to create a relevant resource record. So, or another accession record, or even another archival or an archival object record. So you can use the spawning functionality to take this description that you've done and create a new record template that you can start to fill out, and it pre-populates with some of the information that you've already provided. So you can go ahead and create another accession record if you get like another accrual of the same collection, or if you're ready to process the collection, you could create a resource record. And when you do that, it creates the linkage between this accession record and the new record. So that's just some handy functionality available within accession records. You do not have to use the spawning functionality to create a new or linked resource, archival object, or accession record. I'll say that. You also do not have to create an accession record to then create a resource record. All of these different record types are optional. All right. So from accession records, I'm going to move over and briefly show you, I'm going to show you two different resource records. Within the context of ArchivesSpace, resources can be identified as materials that are in the custody of your repository and are being controlled according to archival principles. Resources can be a whole collection or they can be a single item. So I'm going to show you what a single level resource record looks like, and then I'm going to move over and show you what a resource record that has that hierarchical description, what that looks like. It's where you're going to place the bulk of the information about the intellectual and physical characteristics of archival material. Within a given resource record, you can add a range of descriptive elements as well as notes, write statements, and link repository records. They can be supplemented, and you can see there's a lot of different information here, like notes. And when you have more than 5 notes within ArchivesSpace, just as a performance, a way to improve performance, they collapse all of the notes. So if you see something like this, that just means you need to click it and it will open up all of the notes. But you can see resources can be supplemented with all kinds of things. It's really where you're building your finding aid or your catalog. You can export out your resource record in a variety of formats, including EAD, MarkXML, and PDF. So this is a single level resource record describing a diary, which is contained within one box. This is a very complete resource record. You can see the sorts of information that's included here, but it is a single level record. There is no additional hierarchy, no child records available there. I'm going to show you what a record with hierarchy looks like. So you see very similarly, the same sort of material, information is being provided here for this top level record describing the Krispy Kreme corporate records, which Krispy Kreme is a donut, I don't know what you call it, a donut company in the United States, donut bakery. But anyway, so you can see all of this top level description, lots of notes and subjects affiliated with this collection. This is all top level information relevant to the collection itself. I'm going to scroll back up kind of quickly. And then within that collection, you have significant hierarchy. So you can create this hierarchy either by using some of our spreadsheet templates, which you can invoke here and just import it all via spreadsheet, or you can create the individual records using the ability to like create children directly within ArchivesSpace, or use some functionality that we have like rapid data entry to get this information put in directly within the application. You don't have to use a spreadsheet, but you can see you can get very granular with your information. And here we have a collection that doesn't just have series, they have sub-series, and you can build out as needed to create your finding aid. And then from each individual record, you can select, and then you can see this is the component record. So this is one of the files within the larger collection. You don't need to include as much information here, obviously, because it is inherited a lot of the information from the original collection, or the original record. All right. And then very quickly, I'm also going to show you digital objects. So what I just did is I just moved from a resource record to a digital object record. When you probably are like, well, those look very similar. And when you're using the application, if you ever find yourself lost or you're not sure what kind of record type you're looking at, always follow your breadcrumbs. and your breadcrumbs will tell you that I'm looking at a digital object record, I'm looking at it in edit mode, and this is the record that I'm looking at. I can tell that this is a single level record, there's no hierarchy under it. And while it does look very similar to a resource record, it is different in terms of the type of information that you need to include. Let me say now that ArchivesSpace is not a digital asset management system, and you cannot ingest or store materials into ArchivesSpace. ArchivesSpace supports the management of digital object metadata, so it allows you to manage descriptions of your archival holdings with a single system. You're able to describe both your physical material and your digital material in one place and make it discoverable to your staff and then optionally to your users through a public user interface. The assumption is that the files will be stored and managed in a network or a web accessible location like a file server or a digital asset management system that's capable of managing such files, and then you link it back to ArchivesSpace. The way you do that is with the file URI. So you just provide that direct link to wherever the file is being stored. You can export digital object metadata as METs, mods, or Dublin Core. And digital object records can be linked to related ArchivesSpace accession and resource records and their component records. Digital object records are considered to either be simple or complex in their nature. And again, that looks very similar to what you see in a top level resource record and a resource record that has hierarchy to it. A simple digital object record is one in which the intellectual content of the object is contained in one digital content file. They're single level in structure. You may have just said what? And I'll give you an example in just a second, but what we're looking at here is a simple digital object. This is one single file describing them, and this record is describing the material within that one single file. So it's expressed as a simple digital object. I move over one. A complex digital object is one in which the intellectual content is distributed over two or more digital content files. So they're multi-level in structure. They comprise that parent level metadata record that we've seen, and then one or more child level components. So when you have a record that has multiple files, that you would want to have this as a complex digital object, because what's being described here is being described over multiple files. There's no right or wrong way to do it. And as an example, you may have like a multi-page scrapbook. You may have a scrapbook that's 100 pages. You could digitize that scrapbook and format that 100 pages into a single PDF. And when you open that single PDF file, all of those pages are there. You would then describe that digital object as a simple digital object because it's one file, it's one PDF. Alternatively, you could choose to digitize that scrapbook, and you would take all 100 pages, and each individual page is its own JPEG, and then you would want to describe your materials with those 100 files. It's the same content, you're just expressing it in a different number of files, essentially. That would be a complex digital object because each page of the scrapbook has its own digital file, and you would want to build out something like we're looking at here, where you would have the scrapbook as a high level, top level record, and then each of the individual files describing the individual pages would be described as a complex digital object. That's a lot, and it's really hard to wrap your head around sometimes. So I'll just mention that there's a lot of good resources available, not just in our help center, but also on our YouTube channel about digital object records and managing digital object records. So as you're using ArchivesSpace, or if you're wanting to learn more about how digital objects are managed in ArchivesSpace, I recommend looking at those trainings and things available on our YouTube channel. All right. I am now very briefly going to show you what the ArchivesSpace staff user interface looks like. I'm not going to spend as much time talking about the staff user interface as I did, or sorry, the public user interface. And I'm not going to spend as much time talking about the public user interface as I did the staff user interface, just in the interest of time. But if you have any questions, please let me know. The easiest way to get to the public user interface from the staff user interface is to scroll down to the bottom and just click View Public Interface. So this is the ArchivesSpace public user interface out of the box. This is what it looked like. Use of the public user interface is optional. I will mention that, and I will say that there are other options for the public user interface, like you might want to export out your data from the staff user interface and include it in your own website. There are other things like ArcLight that people use instead of the public user interface. It's totally optional. You do not have to use the public user interface, but if you do, obviously you're going to probably want to customize it a little bit. The ArchivesSpace public user interface publishes archival description that is entered into the staff user interface, but only what you elect to publish. Use of the public user interface is optional, like I said. So you do not need to worry if you're saving records in the staff user interface that those records are automatically becoming available in your public user interface. The only exception to that are subject records. Those are available in the public user interface, but none of your resource records or anything like that are going to be available in the public user interface unless a staff member, a human being, takes the option and manually publishes the material. Don't need to worry about that. So like I said, this is what the homepage of the public user interface looks like. This does not have any customizations. You can do a lot here or a little. And I will say that if you go to our website, our Who's Using ArchivesSpace section of our website, we have a list of members. Any member that has a hyperlink or their name is hyperlinked, that means that their public user interface is available. You might want to search around and see what people are doing for their customizations, but some basic stuff you'll probably want to do would be change the logo to your own logo, change the colors to better match your color scheme at your organization. People like to do things like add here at the bottom, like an FAQ section. People have created some really cool plugins where you could have like an image viewer or a carousel that is showing images from the collection. You can change the names of these categories that people can browse by. So if you don't like the fact that digital materials are called digital materials, maybe you want to call it digital collections, you could do that. You also can hide these. So unprocessed materials, that's accession records. Many organizations do not like to publish their accession records, and you might want to hide that. So you can customize it as you need. Just like with the staff user interface, there is the ability to perform a search. You can do a basic keyword search. You can limit your search types, and you can choose your keyword field. So you can build some very granular searches, as well as doing more advanced searches, just like within the staff user interface. The major difference between the staff user interface and the public user interface searching is, like I said earlier, the staff user interface only searches the repository that you are in. The public user interface, you would be searching all published collections. So researchers are going to see results across all of your repositories. They will also be able to see any like linked subject records. So if you have one repositories or multiple repositories using the same subject records, you'll be able to see the collections that are linked together through shared subjects that are maybe held in different locations or held in different repositories. So it helps them discover the full breadth of the materials at your organization and better plan their research visit if that's what they're doing. They can also browse, just like in the staff user interface, by selecting these options at the top. Just like staff user interface, you can filter your results, and there are additional filters to limit what you're looking at, including being able to limit it by repository. So if you're maybe a researcher who knows they're going to one repository and they want to make sure they're hitting all the highlights at that repository, they can limit that way. You also can learn more information about individual repositories. So these are the repositories that we've been using as example data. If you select one, you can see all of the materials that are available within that single repository. So if you wanted to limit your search to just the collections available within that one repository, you can do that there. And you see, this is what a resource record looks like for a researcher using the public user interface. From here, the researcher can browse all of the archival description that you've published for your resource record. So they can read all of those notes that have been included. They can navigate through the collection organization tab on the left and move to wherever they need to go. So now I moved into a file for this collection. And again, if you ever find yourself lost, just follow your breadcrumbs. So I know what file I'm in what subseries, the series, in the collection, and also the repository. So you can always follow those breadcrumbs. You'll notice there's this staff only button. That's only available if you are a staff member logged into the staff user interface, but it's very handy if I'm a staff user and I'm like, oh my goodness, there's a typo here. I need to go correct that. You can hit staff only and be taken to the staff user interface directly to this record in edit mode, so you can make the changes you'd like. Let me go back. I highly encourage you to explore the public user interface and all aspects of the application in our sandbox. I know I don't have a lot of time to talk about the PUI, That's an open play space that's available online where you can try out the application without having to download anything. I'm going to include a link to that at the end, but if you want to go into our sandbox, you can log in using the username and password admin, and you can see for yourself what the both the staff and public user interface looks like. Just make sure you don't put anything there you don't want others to see, and we do clean it out frequently, so don't put anything there that you would like to keep. All right. Like I said, I know I went really quickly. I want to leave plenty of time for Q&A, so I'm going to move back to my slides. But if anyone has any questions at the end of this, I'm happy to go back or show something else. We can definitely move back into the demo at the end if we need to. So I'm going to move back over to my slides. Christine, let me know. Are we seeing slides?
Yep, slides are there.
We're seeing slides. Okay, cool. All right. So as I mentioned before, while the ArchivesSpace application is free to download and use, ArchivesSpace has a membership model to support the development of the application and user community. Since ArchivesSpace members directly contribute to the sustainability of the application, they're entitled to certain benefits in addition to the ability to serve on the governance councils that I mentioned earlier and provide input into the development of the application. So a little background on membership. Currently, we have over 500 ArchivesSpace member organizations, and membership is at the organizational level. All employees at an organization are entitled to the same benefits. So the membership is at the organizational level, and all employees can access benefits. Everyone is entitled to the same benefits regardless of the size of your organization or how much staff you have. And membership is distributed across 5 levels of corresponding fees. Membership levels range from very small, which has a $300 a year membership fee, to very large, which is a $7,500 a year membership fee. And over half of our members are either small or very small organizations. I don't know what's going on with this formatting. I'm sorry. Membership levels are intended to reflect organizational size and capacity, and all members are entitled to the same benefit regardless of size, like I said. In addition to these membership levels, we also have other types of membership and affiliations for organizations working with ArchivesSpace outside of normal archival work, like our free educational program membership, or our consortium provider program, or our registered service provider program. But for the purposes of today, we're speaking specifically about general membership, meaning people who are using ArchivesSpace to do their work in an archival setting. Again, I'm going to provide you with a series of links at the end of this presentation with this information and more, and these links will be included with the slide, with the recording as well. So what are these benefits I keep talking about? ArchivesSpace membership benefits include access to the ArchivesSpace Help Center, which includes the ArchivesSpace user manual, user tutorial videos, and recordings of past trainings. So if you miss a live training, you can always watch that later. It also includes discounts on live training, so you can get a substantial discount on our live trainings. You get technical support, so if you are installing and managing the application locally, you can get tech support for that. You get access to member-only events and programs like the ArchivesSpace member forums that we hold in person and virtually every year, as well as things like the ArchivesSpace Member Match program, which is a peer-to-peer support program. You get access to our member-only listservs where members communicate with one another and where we broadcast important news and announcements. And you get the ability to collaborate with archivists around the world, as well as guide the development of the application and our member community. So finally, I did say that I was going to include some resources at the end. You'll find all of these on our website, but again, the first is our Getting Started page. From there, you can see how to download the application. You can watch other demos or recordings of trainings. You can explore the sandbox, find other resources to help you. There's also a link here that includes more information about our membership benefits, the fees, and those corresponding levels that I mentioned. And if you're considering ArchivesSpace membership for your organization, but you're not necessarily the one who makes those decisions when it comes to spending money, we have a link here where you can help make your case for ArchivesSpace membership. And then also a link to the Who's Using ArchivesSpace page that I mentioned, so you can see if there's anyone in your area or like organizations that are using ArchivesSpace. And then, of course, you can always contact us at archivespacehome@lyrasis.org. So with that, we're going to move over to the Q&A. I'm going to pause and have a sip of water, but let's see if any questions are coming into the Q&A. All right, so let's see. So the first question, Terry asked, does the software keep a record of changes? Christine, can I ask you to answer that one?
Sure. I'm going to interpret this as a question about whether we have auditing functionality in the application, where ArchivesSpace would keep a record of every single change that is made to a record. And the answer to that is no. But we do know there's a lot of interest in that in the community. So there is a group in the community that is actually working towards creating a more specific specification for that. So there may be some progress on that within the next year or two, I would say. ArchivesSpace does keep a record of when a record was created, who created it, and who was the last person, the last user to touch it, and when, but sort of all those things that happen in the in-between time. It doesn't currently keep a record of that, though there may be some work on that in the future.
Thanks, Christine. All right. Raphael asked a series of questions, so I'm going to go through them one by one. Are there any digital repository plugins that integrate with ArchivesSpace? There are a lot of different integrations and plugins available. The plugins themselves are community generated, and integrations, ArchivesSpace has an open REST API, so integration with another system is theoretically possible with anything with ArchivesSpace, I think I can say. It would depend on your specific example. And I'll mention there are a few different resources available online. There is a GitHub called Awesome ArchivesSpace, which is a place where people who create community generated plugins and things like that can put their community generated plugin and raise awareness about that. That would also be a really great question for our listservs, our member listservs, because people are always interested in things like integrations, and people, use a variety of different systems. So the answer to that is it depends. Do you offer paid support for the platform? So ArchivesSpace is open source. We are a membership supported community. So we are supported through membership, and membership includes those member benefits, including things like technical support. However, there are other options, like perhaps if you don't want to install the application locally, you could use a hosting provider. We have 2 registered service providers who provide hosting to people. Those are Lyrasis and Atlas Systems. You can find that information on our website, but there are a lot of different hosting providers available. If you're looking for support in terms of like assistance migrating your data and things like that, we do have a list of consultants. They're not part of the ArchivesSpace program team, but we do maintain that list. They are people who provide certain services. And if you're interested in a certain service, you can match yourself up with someone. Is support available for on-premise installations? Yes, technical support is included as part of membership, including initial installation of the application. The technical support is handled virtually. We would create a technical support ticket for you, and then someone would set up a time to have a Zoom call to work through your technical support issue. How are updates and security managed for the platform? Christine, do you want to answer that one?
So ArchivesSpace, as Jessica has mentioned, is open source. You can download it. We do have technical documentation that explains how to update the software, explains different ways that you can set up authentication, some basics about sort of how you can secure. It's like any other web application. There's a variety of ways that you can secure it from a system administration standpoint. If you use a hosting provider, they are the ones that will take care of those things for you. If you self-host, then following our technical documentation, which is free, or if you are a member, and as Jessica says, we very much encourage you to become a member, you would get some technical support through membership.
Thanks, Christine. You may have more to say about this one as well. Does ArchivesSpace support SSO via Azure for Windows Active Directory? I'm not sure about that.
So, I mean, that gets into some technical details related to sort of how you administer the platform. You can definitely install Archive. It can go on different kinds of cloud providers, including Azure. And there are different ways that you can secure it and add authentication to it. But when you get down to some very specific things, you would want to check with your hosting provider Or, if you are members, you could check with our technical support about how to do that.
Thanks, Christine. And then the last question that Raphael asked, is there a public catalog where users can request digitization of items? There is some request functionality within ArchivesSpace, the ability to set up a request button where users would then essentially send an email from within ArchivesSpace to request material, but there isn't out of the box a button like that. Potentially that sounds like a great idea for a plugin if a plugin like that doesn't already exist. And then again, depending maybe on the, if you're using a digital asset management system that integrates with ArchivesSpace, that functionality may be possible, but there is no specific button where someone can just request digitization. There is a request button, but again, like I said, it's they email you from within ArchivesSpace and you would set up the specific email address where you would want that information to go. But Raphael, feel free to email us separately with your question. Laura asks, are there a finite number of support request tickets per year? There are not. I mean, I suppose someone could test that limit, but you're welcome to submit as many technical support requests as you want per year. That being said, there are limits to the type of technical support we can provide. We can't help you do like actual data migrations. All of the technical support is happening virtually. We do not provide support for community generated plugins. We can give you general advice about how to administer plugins, but we can't actually, fix plugins that have been created by the community that maybe don't work anymore. So there are limitations to technical support. And if you go on our website, you can look at there's a page related to tech support that explains how you can request it and some of those limitations, but there's not a limited number. And if the technical support question you're asking is outside the scope of what we can provide, we give you some options. Conrad asks, in a university setting, does the membership level reflect the total number of employees at the institution or those within the library archive? In a university setting, your membership size would be based on either your JSTOR or ArchStore classification, not your total number of employees. That'd be huge. If you don't know your JSTOR or ArchStore classification, reach out to the librarian who is responsible for your subscription services, and they will know that answer. Renee asked, do we have a sandbox? Yeah, we do. It's on our getting started page. Like I said, the username and password are admin. Feel free to play around with it. Just make sure you don't put anything there you don't want others to see, and don't put anything there you want to keep. Pete asked, if two separate organizations are using ArchivesSpace but would like to use a joint public catalog, are their individual data sets kept separate? This is for data protection purposes. So that's a good question. And we're definitely seeing examples of this more and more where people or organizations are sharing an ArchivesSpace. Last year, we actually had a webinar on exactly that, on sharing an ArchivesSpace when you are not just divisions within the same organization, but separate organizations sharing an ArchivesSpace. So I'd really recommend checking out that webinar. We had 3 different examples. Organizations came and talked about their use cases and how they're doing that, and tips, tricks, and troubles. There are certain types of records within ArchivesSpace that are shared across repositories, those being like subject records, agent records, location records. So there are considerations if you're really looking at data protection, where there are records that can be shared and where someone outside of your repository could manipulate the data. But the actual accession records, resource records, and digital object records would be specific to your repository, and only those that you give permission and who have access to your repository would be able to manipulate those records. If you decide to use iSAG instead of DAX, does that change labels and help text in the descriptive records? So you can change those rollover tooltips to be more reflective of iSAG or the standard that you would like to use. You would do that within I think it's the config file, right, Christine?
Sorry, I missed that part, Jessica.
Oh yeah, if someone wanted to update their tooltips to iSAG, where would they do that?
So you can do that either through a plugin or where your files related to system administration are on your server. So you would need to get somebody involved who administers your server, whether that's your hosting provider or someone in your local IT. There's some files there that you can change, and you would be able to do those things there to change the tooltips.
Thanks. Dean also asked, does the public display show thumbnails of digital objects hosted elsewhere? It can. It does have that functionality. We call that make representative functionality within ArchivesSpace. It is not actually storing any information, though. It is just showing a representative image of the material. So it does have that functionality, but there are a few nuances to that answer that we don't have time to get into, but the short answer is yes. Any thoughts about the flaws of Atom? What would mainly differentiate your platform? Christine, do you want to answer that one?
So Atom is another open source that archives information management application that probably a lot of people here are familiar with. It is, a very useful and widely used application. So I certainly am not going to get into like things that I think are terrible, because I don't think that things are terrible about Atom. But I do think like ArchivesSpace is very much sort of focused on the collection management and kind of administration functions related to managing collections. So I think we have a little bit more robust functionality there. But ArchivesSpace, as Jessica says, it's not a digital asset management system. So Atom has some features for sort of storing and ingesting digital objects that we don't. So depending on kind of what you prioritize and what you need, one of our systems might be better for you than others.
Thank you, Christine. I did not want to answer that one. Nicola asked, is there any degree of interface customization in terms of the look of the website in order to match the rest of an institution's website? Yes, absolutely. And I know that a lot of organizations do that. They want it to look as seamless as possible whenever a user is moving from the organization's website onto the public user interface. So I would say definitely look at our Who's Using ArchivesSpace page and get some ideas. You can be you can do a lot of customizations. It just really depends on the resources at your organization and your own limitations in terms of how far you can take those customizations. But it's very easy to do things like changing the graphics and the logos and the color to make it look more thematically similar to the rest of your sites. You can definitely do that. It would just require, someone having access to the server where your ArchivesSpace implementation lives and making those changes. Laura asks, what options are there for Canadian hosting? So I know we have two registered service providers. There are Lyrasis and Atlas Systems. I think that at least Lyrasis has Canadian hosting clients. Another hosting provider that a lot of people use are Library Hosts, but those are just larger hosting providers that we sometimes recommend to people. There are a lot of different consortia out there and regional hosting providers that others may recommend. So if anyone else knows of a hosting provider that they would recommend, feel free to drop that into the chat, but it really would depend on maybe like regionally reaching out to some groups to see what other hosting providers are available. Fleur says, you mentioned bulk import, but is it also possible to do bulk changes, for example, updating access rights? It is. So it is possible to use bulk edit functionality as of ArchivesSpace version 4.0. So if you are using an earlier version of ArchivesSpace, or if you're listening to this and you're thinking about using ArchivesSpace, if you want to use the bulk edit functionality in the application, you will need to make sure that you're using ArchivesSpace version 4.0 or newer. But yes, it is possible. And we have documentation in our user manual about how to do that. How customizable is the system in terms of adding or removing specific fields or making certain fields mandatory when filling out metadata for a resource, for example? If you want to change the sorts of fields that are mandatory, that might be something you'd have to do with a plugin. And in terms of adding and removing fields, again, I think especially with adding fields, that probably would be best handled with a plugin. Christine may have a better answer for that. One sort of easy thing that people do in the application, if there are fields that at their organization they want to make sure people always use, is we have some default value functionality where you can kind of create a template for your resource record. So when someone goes to create a new resource record, It's meant to be a time-saving functionality. So if you know you always have the same language in your resource or your like your access restriction note, you can always, it'll just immediately pre-populate. Some people also use that functionality to do things like highlight fields that at their organization they require. So they'll put something in brackets in a field that says you must put content here. So that's a way that you can do that really easily without even having to access the back end of your application. But I don't know if Christine has any other thoughts.
Those are definitely the major ways to do those kinds of things. I think one of the things that we definitely encourage is that ArchivesSpace, the data schemas be the same for everybody, that you not remove things from the schema itself, and we don't either. Though we do have some limited functionality, for example, with agents to change which fields are required through the data entry forms. But there's all kinds of ways that you can extend or change how ArchivesSpace works for yourself with plugins often. Or plugins or documentation inside or outside the application. So there definitely is a lot of customizability.
Thanks, Christine. All right, we are all caught up in the Q&A. I can't believe it. We have another minute though, so if anyone wants to drop a last minute question into the chat, I'd be happy to answer that. But also just keep in mind that if you later on a question springs to mind and you want us to answer it, you can always email us at archivespacehome@lyrasis.org, and you can find lots of great resources on our website. Otherwise, I'm speaking slowly in case anyone wants to drop something into the chat, but otherwise we will go ahead and wrap up. Thank you all so much for being here. And again, feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions, and I look forward to talking with you soon. Thanks, everyone.